Glaciers around the world are melting so quickly that the scale of the loss is difficult to comprehend. Death, on the other hand, is a universal experience familiar across all cultures. To bridge that gap, anthropologists Dominic and Cymene, Howe of Rice University are drawing parallels between human death rituals and the disappearance of glaciers, offering people a more tangible way to understand what's been lost. They held funerals for glaciers, built a temporary glacier graveyard with headstones carved from ice, and launched the Global Glacier Casualty List, an online archive of stories and images documenting disappearing ice from the Alps to the Andes. Yale Climate Connection spoke with the project's creators about why memorializing glaciers matters and how these stories can inspire action. This interview has been edited. Yale Climate Connections. Why is it important to look at each glacier as having its own personality and to recognize each one individually when it's gone? Dominic. The world loses 273 billion tons of glacial ice each year. That's a staggering figure. A lot of zeros, right?
And at the same time, it's really hard for anyone to understand what 273 billion tons of ice really means.
It's so abstract it becomes kind of experientially alienating for people to even try to imagine that. But glaciers have a lot of animate features. They have been named because they move, make sounds, and have distinctive smells. And human communities both depend upon glaciers and are also vulnerable to glaciers in times of climate change. They live downstream from them, use their water, or could be threatened by destabilizing floods. And so, one of the things we've tried to do is to bring the destabilization and loss of the world's glaciers down to more of a human scale, down to a level where people are more able to emotionally connect to this phenomenon. Because we think if people emotionally connect to it, they are more likely to be motivated to make changes or to pressure policymakers to make changes that are necessary to help slow down the loss of the world's glaciers. What inspired you to hold a funeral for a glacier? People understand the funeral. They understand what it means to lose someone. And death rituals are about as close to a human universal as you can get culturally. Almost every society that we know of has had some kind of a death ritual, so it's a way that humans come together as communities to mark the passage of time and to recommit to living together communally after the loss of a loved one. Cymene and Howe hosted the first funeral for a glacier in Iceland back in 2019, and that was for Octkul or OK Glacier, which was a little glacier, but a named glacier, that had died in Iceland to little fanfare, and the world had essentially shrugged. We felt that Octkul, even though it was a small glacier, deserved more recognition, and so we created a memorial for Octkul on top of OK Mountain, along with some collaborators from Iceland, and hosted this first funeral for a glacier. Image credit, Dominic. CC by NC 4.0, but we wanted to expand the global understanding that glaciers almost everywhere on Earth and almost every glacier on Earth is in fact dying or critically endangered because of the climate crisis, so we held the glacier graveyard in the summer of 2024. We worked with an Icelandic ice carver to create individual headstones that were all created from ice. And then we created this graveyard with 15 glaciers that have either died or are in danger of dying very soon out on the peninsula near Reykjavik. We had representatives of the glaciers of Kilimanjaro from the African continent of Cymene, which is a glacier that died recently in the French Alps, glaciers of Colombia, Venezuela, Mexico. And we held a ceremony with eulogies for each of these glaciers and an Icelandic funeral choir. We hope that this would create a symbolic way of recognizing the loss of glaciers and their importance in the world to us all. How we're gathering the stories and the reflections from people who live near glaciers, work with glaciers, or are really directly affected by glaciers and their transformation in these times of climate crisis.
So for them, glaciers are not abstract bodies of ice, but they are sources of water, sources of folk tales and history and origin stories, sometimes going back to the beginning of human settlements in these regions.
Several stories are from indigenous communities who value these glaciers in ways that are different from the way people focused on the Western or scientific side might. And with an online platform, we're able to more effectively network and collaborate with people all over the world and share this resource globally. The other advantage of this interactive website for the Global Glacier Casualty List is that you can scroll over the globe, zoom in, and fly down to certain glaciers. If you want to go look at the glaciers of the Alps and East Africa, the Himalayas, you can track over to those places and actually see what it's like to be on the ground next to the place where that glacier was or where it's currently disappearing. So you can get this what we'll call a street view of that mountainous region, and you can see the rivers moving and the grassy areas and the rock slides and all of the different dimensions that are available from the satellite imaging. And so there's a really robust diversity of stories here, a set of images, and then of course the ability to be able to literally move around the globe and see in a very visual way how glaciers have been everywhere and they are everywhere melting away. Are there any stories that stood out to you in putting this all together?